This week on Supercars Torque, Thomas Randle wins the Super2 Championship. Some drivers have decided to retire. Some events have decided to retire. And there's talk of commentary changes. The big news on everybody's lips this week: Jamie Whincup has been kicked out of Queensland. So, apparently they used a loophole to get home. Jamie is a truck driver. He's got his big truck driving licence. And apparently freight drivers are allowed to go interstate and do whatever they want with all these COVID restrictions. So Jamie jumps behind the wheel of the Triple Eight transporter and drove on home, and the police came a-knocking a few days later. It was all cleared, it was all okay. The cops came around a few days later and said, no, back to New South Wales, do your quarantine before you come in. Most of the guys in the Queensland teams and that are doing this quarantine to get home. The Victorian teams, no such issues, because at that point we were still out of control with COVID, so, take your own chances on coming back home. The actual big news of the week has been Adelaide 500 is no more. When I first read about this, I thought it was just going to be for next year. Due to the whole COVID thing, it was one of the few events that we did get off as per normal this year. And I figured, because of all the COVID things going on, there was talk of them moving it later on in the year to make sure that they could have crowds and that next year. It looks like that isn't the case, and it's not going ahead. It's a sad day. It has been a great event. When it was first talked about, it seemed like a pipe dream kind of thing, that the supercars would have a street race event, that really it was like the Grand Prix was only a few years earlier. To think that it's gone on for just over 20 years, just an amazing event, and it led to a few other street track events like Canberra, Hamilton over in New Zealand, and now we've got Townsville and Newcastle. Apparently a little bit on shaky ground, Newcastle especially, and the Gold Coast, which was already there, but the Adelaide 500 kind of paved the way for supercars to take over the Gold Coast as a standalone event, that we weren't, dependent on having kart, IndyCar, Champ Car, whatever you wanted to call it, over the various years and owners and things like that. So a sad day. Makes a bit more sense with the whole Bathurst going to be the opening round as well next year, and that's also because Supercars has got the contract for the 12-hour, and they're using that event. I imagine that's only a stopgap thing while there will be no 12-hour for 2021. Thomas Randle is the 2020 Super2 Champion. So at Bathurst, we weren't sure what was happening with this championship, whether they were going to try and run at least one more round towards the end of the year. They've decided they're not going to. So Tom, you're the champion. Brody could have been in the running there for the championship, but they sat out at Bathurst. Will Brown ended up second. Jaden Ojeda was the rookie of the year. He's already confirmed he's going to have another run around next year at it. A little bit of an anticlimax to find out a few weeks later that he is the champion. Fingers crossed that he gets to move up to the main game next year. Some driver retirements were announced this week. Rick Kelly has hung up the helmet from full-time driving. A little bit of interesting things there, whether a driver coming on board at their team with the sponsorship package kind of pushed him, and possibly also Rick's sponsor going elsewhere for next year, and possibly even Rick going elsewhere for a co-drive next year. More on that later when I do my silly season special episode. The other driver movement, Fabian Coulthard no longer required at DJR. I nearly said DJR Team Penske. It will only be DJR. This doesn't come as a shock to anyone. Probably the shock was that he was there for so long when he was just destroyed by Scott McLaughlin over a few years. Will Coulthard end up anywhere else, and will it kind of show how good Scott was in comparison? If Fabian ends up somewhere and starts blowing away teammates and co-drivers and that, he's definitely not going to get the kind of money he was getting at Team Penske, and you could question whether he deserves a seat elsewhere. What I've heard as well, performance wasn't the ultimate deciding factor in this as well. The ultimate deciding factor was the whole Debris thing and how extreme Fabian's slowing down was. That everyone has a go at Scott McLaughlin about this and that he didn't win the race fairly and all that kind of stuff, but not much has really been said about you'd have to think as a driver, okay, I've been told to slow down, I'm going down Conrod Straight, I can't see anything ahead of me, is doing 30k an hour, is that reasonable? In your head you would have been, I know I need to double stack in the pits, I need to get a bit of a gap, I need X amount of seconds. Like, it was over the top, that move, and apparently that was a big issue in why he's been shuffled on. The whole Rick Kelly retiring from full-time driving, he's had a long run. He's been a main driver since, I think it was 2002 was his first year as a full-time driver. Be sure I'll be corrected in the comments if that's wrong. But he's actually, as much as he divides opinion, and most of that probably because his family had money, like he came in. He's definitely not a rich kid just buying a ride, though. No one can say that about the Kellys. They definitely did deserve to be there. The whole incident when he won the championship with Lowndes, one questionable incident just because it was with your title rival right at the end of the championship. It doesn't take away everything that you did for the rest of the year and everything you did for the rest of your career, and that was a bit of a questionable, Lowndes blocking, things like that. As you may guess, I'd probably sit on the Kelly side of the fence. I think he's had a great career. I was surprised that I think it was only 13 wins over his whole career. I would have thought it would have been more, especially he had a couple of Bathurst wins in there. They were a front runner for a long time, and I've just been blown away at what they did with the Mustang project this year. Although he's not so much involved in that side of things, he's more on the commercial side of the team. It's probably a loss. He's a loss to the category, I think, because he's definitely one of the few characters that's left, and someone that divides opinion. There's a lot of guys in the field that everybody kind of likes and doesn't. There's not so many nowadays that you're either one side or the other on them, and that kind of sparks up, especially if those drivers are doing well, and there's not many of those guys left that you really like, love or hate, and Rick seems to be one of those love or hate guys. The last thing I wanted to cover today is talk about commentary team changes for next year, and unfortunately for some of us, it's possibly not what we're after. So Channel 7 and Fox will be having the same commentary team all the way through, so we can't say, thank God we've got Foxtel, we don't have to listen to Mark Beretta. He's definitely not the worst one that we've had over the years, but he at least he's a fan of the sport, I suppose. He definitely does fall into that kind of Channel 7 push category. He's not one of the ones who's, there for, he's one of those whatever colour kind of ones. Speaking of colour commentators, apparently Charlie High Five Robinson is going to be part of the commentary team next year. She was in a kids band and apparently brings in the younger audience. On the good news front, Andy Jones looks like he's going to be doing a lot more pit lane reporting next year. On the bad news front, though, Rhianna Crean and Greg Murphy are probably going to be shuffled along. Rhianna, because there's no place for her. Greg Murphy, because apparently he costs a lot. I'm not sure. I would imagine that Scaife and Lowndes would cost more, but apparently Murphy is costly, and the problem, he hasn't been able to travel here all year because of the COVID problems, and they're not sure whether that's going to cause issues next year or not. And he's a divisive kind of character. We probably need a Kiwi on the commentary panel though, because, well, the Kiwis are up the front of the field, or it looks like two of the front Kiwis are out next year. But I like Murphy. He's knowledgeable. And the most stupid ones, we're keeping the Scaife Lowndes mess, but possibly getting rid of Crompton and Larkham because they're too technical. I think Crompton is the best commentator out there, and I think Scaife should be shuffled along. And maybe even if we had a Beretta and then someone else in the commentary booth, I think we need to go back to that kind of 3 commentator thing with a host and then, two kind of knowledgeable people. On the good news front, Jess Yates will be retained as the overall kind of host during everything, and there is talk that Paul Morris could be joining them in some kind of description. Morris is definitely a good one for the commentary team because his knowledge is brilliant, and he's not afraid to have a crack and say what he thinks. So that's it for this week. Apologies, next doors, I don't know if they're chopping down trees or what the hell's going on. I have been waiting for ages to try and record this, and it all went quiet and then fired back up. So if that's coming across in the sound, I do apologise. But I took a chance in a gap Anyway, these things happen sometimes. Fingers crossed it's not too bad. Over the next couple of days, I will be releasing a special silly season episode. I was going to do it as a standalone, one episode a week, but with everything that's going on at the moment, things are backing up a bit, and there is topics that we need to talk about. So until next time, I'm Dave, and I'll see you later.